The first caucus of 2020 is in less than 24 hours. Soon, the people of Iowa will determine who takes the lead in the Democratic primary. Let's talk last-minute strategies, Iowa, and who will win. This is Primary Focus. First, let's talk Iowa, the older brother state that gets to go first because they said so. Which means that if another state were to move their primary to February 2nd, Iowa would move to February 1st. Frankly, I think another state should really call them on their bluff here, and I'm looking at you, Delaware, the first state. Why not move your caucus to Election Day, 2020? What now, Iowa? You still gonna go first? I doubt it. And not only is Iowa full of cowards until proven otherwise, but they're also not really representative of America as a whole. 90% of them are white, and the majority of them go to church regularly. To be fair, Eucharist-loving white people are the wonder bread and butter of our country. So really, it's like they say about New York City. If you can make it in Iowa, you can probably make it in New Hampshire as well. To be fair to Iowa, they have correctly picked the candidate that will end up with the nomination in 4 out of the last 5 elections. But this is no normal election. For instance, there are 5 if you include certain polls, candidates that are right by that 15% threshold that's so important. And this is different from the 15% threshold in Florida, where if your blood alcohol content is under 15%, you're allowed to drive legally. The 15% threshold in Iowa means that you need to get 15% of the vote to get some of the delegates from Iowa. Meaning if Joe Biden gets 30% and Bernie Sanders gets 15%, Joe Biden gets double the number of delegates as Bernie, but they both get delegates. So that means that of the 4 candidates, if all of them make the 15% threshold, then they're doing a 4-way split of the measly 41 delegates of Iowa. And keep in mind, you need almost 2,000 delegates to get the nomination. So am I saying that the Iowa caucus doesn't matter? I'm going to hit you with a hard maybe. While it may not matter for the number of delegates you earn, it makes a huge difference in terms of momentum and media coverage, especially if you can also win the #1 state in the country for having the second primary, New Hampshire. One last thing I want to note is the community engagement aspect of voting in Iowa. You don't just go alone into a voting booth, pick who you want, and go home. You have to physically go to a gymnasium or rec center and then group together with other like-minded supporters of friends and neighbors in your community, unless of course you're a Michael Bennet supporter, in which case you don't, and then wait until all the votes are counted. If your candidate does not reach the 15% threshold, you're forced to choose a frontrunner that is at or above 15%. So what's this going to mean for the election? Will the underrepresented Yang Gang and Gabbard gaggle be enough to boost Sanders to the top? Or will all the like-minded moderate hacks that I refuse to acknowledge group together into some sort of golem with soulless eyes and foul drool dripping from its open maw? And no, never mind, it's just Joe Biden. So how are the candidates rallying their troops ahead of the first big battle of 2020? Well, Joe Biden seems to just be getting more and more angry as he slips out of the top spot. I mean, if you haven't seen the video of him yelling at a Tom Steyer supporter that dared speak to him at a public event, I highly recommend it. He's just poking and yelling at this man who has no idea why he's being yelled at. He looks like Joe Biden's grandchildren when they're yelled at for having fun too loudly. Meanwhile, Pete Buttigieg is holding on for dear life to his only area of support. I mean, he's losing a grip on his literal base. These are the only people that support him. He's polling at nearly 0% with all non-white Americans. That'd be like if you asked the Beehive who their favorite pop star was, and Beyonce lost to Bernie Sanders. And unfortunately for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they're stuck in D.C. dealing with something. I don't know. It doesn't have to do with the primary, so I don't care about it. This seems to be affecting Warren a lot more than Sanders, and it's also really affecting Amy Klobuchar, who was gaining some solid momentum in Iowa, and now is forced to just be stuck around so many throwable objects and no aids to hurl them at. Really though, we won't know the end result until the end of caucus night. And of course, Bernie Sanders leads, but just narrowly in most of the polls. And like I said, the Red Rover style voting symposium could go his way, or Biden's, or really anyone else. The delegates could end up being split 4 ways, forcing this primary to go on even longer, which of course I would love. I mean, personally, I wish we had a president every year just so we could always have a primary. Now, if I were to bet, I would say Bernie Sanders will end up with that #1 spot at the end, getting all the momentum and media coverage going into the rest of the primary. That's mainly because his base consists of people outside of the likely voter category that determines the polls, so there's a chance that he could really take it away, whereas everyone else seems pretty likely to hit around their poll aggregate numbers. I think Bernie Sanders can be feeling pretty confident right now, and that's got to make him feel pretty happy. Not as happy as I am to thank today's sponsor, Data. Running for office but don't want dumb people to know you're evil? Trick 'em! Voting is socialist and bad, and you know better than them. For only a couple $1,000,000, you can buy an entire election. Data. Technically different from Cambridge Analytica. Thanks for watching. See you next time for more debates.